Ave Maria Purissima.
Isn't that nice?
Yes, I like the song. Ave Maria Purissima, in nome del Padre e Spirito Santo.
But you know that I have connections with Spain.
I know.
You know, through this organization.
A lot. By the way, we're doing this in English. We can now Deutsch reden.
Do you speak German?
Yeah.
Which is better?
I don't care. But the point is that I think many people are going to be interested in this.
They want to be?
Interested in this conversation.
You think so?
I do.
Where?
Everywhere. I have a lot of friends in well,
you teach in Spain, don't you?
Yeah, right now I am in Spain, but so I spent 20 years of my life, well actually 21 years of my life in Germany.
Oh, I see, so you speak German.
Yeah, I was married to a German woman,
Uh-huh.
unfortunately, I must say.
I was married to a German woman, fortunately.
Yeah, well in my
I
case...
had luck. I had luck.
Yes, in my case the prefix is an.
Is?
Unfortunately. Yeah. But anyway, this is, it happens, right?
Yeah, often.
It happens very often. And, but I had heard a lot about you from some friends. And so you're interesting to me because of probably 3 reasons. The first reason, because you are interesting. I think you're an interesting person. Because I'm not, I mean, I don't want to talk about your life because everybody has been talking about your life and we know who you are. But it takes a certain type of temper or personality to lead the way you led, right? So that makes you interesting. The second point probably is that you are interesting because of what you did, which is not equivalent to point number 1. And number 3 is that you're interesting because you are smart and you have experienced a lot of things.
That I have.
And this is why I want to talk to you.
Yes, tell me when you say we, who would see this or hear it?
When I say we, did I say we? Well, that was a Freudian thing.
I think you did.
I don't. So we are.
What I mean is, when I answer you questions, it's good if I know is this mostly for Germans, for Spanish, for.
That's the point. No, I've spent 21 years of my life in Germany, mostly in. So I did my PhD in Heidelberg, and I moved to Berlin. I spent like 12 years at the Albert Einstein Institute.
Which one?
Albert Einstein Institute.
Oh yeah, in Potsdam.
In Golm, yes. And but I've been traveling a lot, and I have of course a lot of friends everywhere in Europe, but also I have here in Germany I was a group leader at the Max Planck Gesellschaft, but in China, in Peking, I also built a group, and I was spending 2 months a year.
Oh really?
Yes, before the pandemic.
You know, my grandson is there.
No, I didn't know that.
My grandson got his master's degree in Chinese. He's fluent in Chinese.
Is he?
And he's been working in Beijing for a few years.
Oh, is he there now?
Yes.
Okay.
But I think he may not stay much longer. The whole German-Chinese relationship is weakening.
Of course.
And he's with some German company, I think, which I don't know. And I think he's had enough. Not that he didn't like it, but it's enough for him. But he has a Chinese girlfriend who studies here actually, but she's with him in China now, and it looks like it's serious.
Okay, that's good. You know what? I'm going to change this, and we can hide your.
Yeah. So since I'm looking over there.
Yeah, and we hide your belly.
Yeah. Yes, I have. He's evidently fluent reading and writing Chinese.
Okay, maybe like this. Yeah, I did some.
Careful.
Yeah, I did 3 courses in Chinese, so intensive courses in Chinese
Yes.
in 1.5 months. And I can manage to get my, to at least communicate at a very basic and primitive way,
Yeah.
like a bus stop.
That's about like me in Spain.
Okay.
But I should say, however, you know that I put together a book about Spain. I don't know. Do you know my Madrid to Wunderbara? Do you know that?
I know that it exists about the book, but I haven't read it.
It's I can show you, or I can maybe even have a copy. It's a compiled short quotations of volunteers during the Civil War from all countries, or many countries, combining those which are mostly informative. It's mostly the international brigades.
Yes.
But I also try to put some humor, some tragedy, some humor, to make it readable, especially for young readers. Unfortunately, it's only in German. I would be so happy to see that translated into either English or Spanish, but have it only in German. But I have some wonderful quotations, wonderful, including some interesting ones from George Orwell.
Yeah, I know that he was in Spain.
Yes, of course, but he wrote mostly negatively, but there's some statements he wrote which are directly opposite to what you think about him.
I don't know what that I think about him, but
Well, for example, he said, you know, he worked with this Poom,
mhm.
and he says in one paragraph, we were wrong with Poom, which is unusual because mostly it's pro Poom.
Yeah.
But he says it was wrong, and he says, now Green was better than we thought.
Yeah.
And he says, they were not so tough after May 37. He says, interesting things, just little sentences that nobody seems to have noticed. And I picked them up and put them in my book.
How?
Hmm?
How did you get to know this sentence?
Well, from his book. From his book. And I also asked the publisher if I could print them, and they had no objection. They're short, they're mostly this long or this long or this long, and nothing more. But I have some wonderful quotations from nurses who were there, from people, cultural people, for example, Hans Eisler and was there, you know, and from Abraham Lincoln people and people from Britain, from Ireland, Switzerland, Germany, Romania, and very few Spanish voices, a few. I quote that famous speech by Ibarra, you know, at the end.
Of course, yes.
But and the famous Hemingway, you know, the Hemingway essay.
Yeah.
I have those in there too. And 2 stories of individual persons who, very, very dramatic, which very few people know about. So that it's lots of interesting stuff in there, but only in German.
Well, I can read German, but I would not translate it.
Remind me before you leave.
Yeah, thank you. But so there is a.
Or I can show it to you now if you like.
No,
Later.
Yes, because we have this.
Yeah.
All of this set up. But so there's one thing that is, I don't know, worrying me or
Yes.
bugging me or I don't know what. As I said, so I came here the last millennium, actually, 1999,
So it was, yeah.
or the last century.
It was all over with the GDR.
Yeah, of course. And I've been a researcher in Germany. First I did my PhD at the University of Heidelberg, and then I moved to the Max Planck Society. And over all of these 20-something years, I had one impression about German education, in general, and my impression was not very positive. I thought people do not have a great education here. They're not critical.
They're not?
They're not criticizing
I feel critical, yeah.
what they should as scientists. Their background is not strong. They do not seem to know much. Hold on.
But of course, it's obvious that the two educations, East and West, were completely different,
I come to
with
that.
their pluses and minuses.
Yes, Victor. But should I call you?
Yeah, sure.
Victor. Well, the question was Victor or Steve, but I guess it's Victor.
Victor is what I'm used to here. When I'm in the States, or last night, I was at a Harvard meeting. And at Harvard, of course, they know me as Steve.
I see.
But these people didn't know me at Harvard, so I didn't know what to say. I tell them, whatever they want, it's the same to me.
Okay. Well,
But I'm used to Victor here. I like Steve better, but I never liked Victor much, but I got used to it.
okay.
So is Victor, is probably safer,
Safer.
less confusing.
So, but then for personal reasons, I have two kids. They're living with me. They wanted to move with me to Spain, and it's a long and boring personal story. But there were 2 trials, etc. And in the end, the kids came with me to Spain.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I am what they call these days, using this fancy, because nowadays everything has a word, right? It's a monoparental family or whatever, right?
Are they bilingual?
Yes, of course.
Spanish, German?
Spanish, German, and Catalan.
And so also, yes.
And
Because you live in Catalonia.
well, I don't live politically. It's not Catalonia, but they Valencia.
Valencia, that's right, I remember.
Culturally,
Well, they call it Catalonia too.
they're not, this is a very. We could talk about this like for 2 hours.
Okay, yeah.
But
yeah.
the point is that culturally is the same language. They speak a dialect, but they have big problems with that because they see Catalonia as a big enemy which wants to conquer. I don't know, but this is
The Valencianos?
Yes,
Yeah. Oh,
yes,
I didn't know that, yeah.
yes. After the Civil War, the Civil War in Spain was a systematic. How should I say? Washing out of a certain type of mentality and thought. They did a systematic eradication of a way of thinking.
I mean, after 39.
Yes.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And they managed. They really managed. But anyway, so after these 20 years, I have been trying to push it as much as possible away from me, but in the end, I had to accept a professorship at the university.
At which?
This one is the Polytechnical University in Valencia.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And to my surprise, when I moved there and started teaching, I saw that the level was as low as here, if not lower.
Really?
Yes.
I should say here, I've been facing this problem just a little. There's a woman, the woman who cleans up here. Every 2 weeks she comes here. And she has 2 daughters who are in school here. They're, I think, 6th grade. She said they haven't read in the whole year, they read 1 book.
And that's a lot.
Yes, they don't want to read any books. They reject all books. She loves books. She cannot get them to read books.
And this is what I'm going to. What is the reason for that?
By the way, it's not every place. I spoke to another from another school, and she says, no, we do things to get them to read books. So it's not all the same.
They're trying, but the point is that when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, I was extremely enthusiastic about things. I was very motivated.
So was I. Yeah.
I was an extremely bad student,
Right.
Yes, because I did not understand anything, and now I start to understand why I didn't understand things. But I was very curious, and I was trying to look for information. I was reading, I was asking, I was trying to get to understand things. I was thinking about things.
When was this?
I was born in '74.
So there was after Franco.
Yes, yes.
After Franco, but still in the indecisive period.
Yeah,
when
they call it a transition.
Yeah,
but
yeah, that's what I
but
yeah.
there was no transition.
It was still fascistic.
Of course.
Yeah.
So the ministers who were part of the government with
Yeah.
Franco turned into democratic.
Yeah. You know, it's very similar to here in some ways. To get into the into the nitty gritty, would say, this is something like what we faced here after 1989-90. You understand?
Yeah, I do.
The whole education system, but everything changed completely, and which was very difficult for young people because their whole orientation was gone. They had been under stress to learn, you know, socialist, communist education. Many rejected it, but they all had it fed into them, whether they rejected it or not. Suddenly, that was taboo and completely gone. And many of them were not really found their way. They found no orientation. That's why you had fascist groups building up. And for those of us who are older, it was extremely painful.
I understand that, but
Still is, by the way. It still is painful.
of course, this is why I want to listen to you, because I am running around the table in panic, because what I see is very worrying. As a professor at the university, I try to explain to them what they don't know, and I try to tell them, look, I am using a textbook that I was using when I was 15 years old to teach you, and you are 18, 19 years old. They are cheating on you.
Yeah.
They are cheating
Yes.
on you.
This is in Valencia.
Yes. But then here is the same thing. Students lack not just the background to do whatever job they want to do in the future. I mean, it doesn't have to be mathematician or physicists, whatever. They're lacking a background, but not on just one thing, but on everything.
I think it's even worse in the United States.
I don't know. I used to think that. I would make fun of people in the US when they were, interviewing people on the street and saying, could you please point Africa?
Yeah.
And they could not.
I know. I saw a film about that. They couldn't find out. They couldn't find anything.
But this is happening here now.
I'm
Exactly
sure.
the same thing.
Yes. It's evidently here. Yeah.
But what is this? Is this neoliberalism?
But the difference seems to be, of course, it's mistaken to generalize, because of course the United States has some wonderful schools too, especially the private schools. But for the general education, and here I think they get, in the GDR, they evidently got a very good in reading, writing, better than in the West.
Yeah.
And they got very good in mathematics and scientific field, perhaps almost too much. And they got a lot of literature, but of course, one-sided literature. Well, also international literature, but basically it was left-wing literature. But they read. They had to read. Today, from what I gather, and I have no children in school, so I have no real contact, but from what I gather, the reading and writing has gone downhill. The reading of books in general has gone downhill. Of course, it's partly because of this business, we didn't have before. But this woman says they don't even go to the movies. They don't know the film. All they want is...
That's what I want to talk about. What I see is a complete lack of what defines a human being to be a human being.
Yeah. That's what I'm afraid of too. Except that I'm afraid of it, but when you went on to say that you're almost in panic, I've just been writing people who, well, you know, I put out this bulletin. I get a good deal of interesting response, and many of them are pretty desperate isn't the word, but very worried and from the United States, but also from here and other countries. I try to maintain a certain degree of optimism, also in myself, which isn't easy these days because the situation in Ukraine is extremely dangerous. Now, in the last few days, even more dangerous with this drone business.
Yeah.
At the same time, there are signs in different parts of the world where people are fighting back, and this gives me some hope. In Britain, they had the biggest strike wave in decades. In France, 1 million on the street. Big strikes here. In the United States, they're beginning to organize in Amazon and in these places, and there may even be a socialist mayor in Chicago, which is the third city of USA. It's not quite certain if he can win next month, but there are signs of people really fighting back. There are a lot of signs that they aren't, but I refuse to be a completely pessimistic view.
This is why I wanted to come here, because I have this tendency of probably being drawn down by a kind of very brutal pessimism. And the other day I was at your birthday, and you said I'm turning 95 today, but I refuse to quit fighting or something like that, right?
Yes.
But what is there to do, Victor? I have 2 kids, and I've been talking to them not only because I do not believe, and that sentence drives me crazy when somebody says, "Oh, I'm doing science, I don't know anything about humanities," and vice versa. I'm doing humanities, I do not know anything about sciences. I think that's...
How old are they?
They are 18 and almost 14 years old. But they have been taking from me long discussions and talks, and in a joyful way. It's not that I was forcing them to learn things with me, but we've been talking about philosophy, mathematics, history, and they've been learning with me. They've been studying with me ancient Greek and Latin since they are 6.
Really?
Which was a reason why I had big arguments with my ex-wife. Why are you teaching them something useless,
yes.
right? But you would I was expecting that such children would flourish and become interested and driven by curiosity. I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing that. I have to. I recently, on the younger one, my daughter, she wanted to go on a trip to Paris, and I said, how much is it? 670 euros. I said, okay, you know that a cleaning person is getting 10 euros an hour. Do you still want to go there? Yes. Okay. Well, I mean, the program is not to go to Paris, it's to go to Disney World, and it's not going to Paris, which is why I was not very much in favor of it. And I said, okay, you're going there, but you're going to read 4 books. Books.
Books, yeah.
Until summer. And she was protesting. The first book I gave to her was Crime and Punishment.
What she should read before she goes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she read it. The second one, I thought, I'm going to push it. I gave her Anna Karenina book,
Yeah.
which is about 600 pages, and she was complaining. And then a friend of mine was talking to us.
She complained about reading it,
Oh, it's a very thick book, you know.
but did she start it?
Yeah, she's finishing now.
But did she get into it?
Yes. Is she digesting it? Yes, she's digesting it.
It may take a while. I read it, but so long, both of them, long time ago, in high school.
But the point is that a Russian friend of mine said, "Oh yes, I remember when I was at school, we got a list of books to read over summer." And my daughter asked, "How many?" And the answer was 30. And then she became very embarrassed, and now she's not complaining. Did you know, by the way, that Russia is giving up Bologna, the Bologna plan, and they're going back to the Soviet
No, I
education?
didn't know that.
Yes.
But I'll tell you this, that I don't know if you read my book, I talk of it. Yeah, take all whatever you want, as much as is left in there. We had a teacher in the 12th grade, and he had a special course for those who were especially interested, for the better students. And it was world literature from beginning to end, or beginning to the present. And he started with the ancient Greeks and the Bible, and then went on to the every week a different author. Each of the Greek playwrights, a week, Aeschylus, three plays by Sophocles, and then we went on to the historians, and then we went on to and so forth on, and it's the best course I ever had, because he gave us a lot to read, but not the whole books. We couldn't do that in 1 week. He picked out important parts, but then he questioned us on it, so that to see that we really read them. And not only that, but every second week we had to write a paper and submit it. Anything we wanted, a review, a criticism, a parody, whatever we wanted. And this really was vital for my whole life. I of course, I've forgotten an awful lot, but I got to know Greek mythology, and I got to know, to taste Don Quixote, and Dante, and Milton, which I otherwise would not have. It was something which I wish everybody had, except with one thing, of course. It should not be so completely Europe-centrified. They should also know that there was literature and culture in Africa and China and India, etc. But it was really, it helped me my whole life.
Yeah, but that left, this is what I mean, that left a mark on you. And I've been devoting, almost literally devoting my life to the education of my children. And I don't see a spark of enthusiasm. And
That's what this woman says, that comes here. She says, her daughter said,
I've read the books.
in fact, my granddaughter, I asked her about reading them, the masters of German literature. Why? What should I? What good is it? They don't understand that it's a humanitarian need to know your world and to know thinking, and they don't understand it, and they're not getting it really.
But why is this happening? What is your thesis?
Well, I think partly is simply that it's easier to look at and to chat with your friend than it is to sit and read a book. And then this was such a distraction. First this, and then the handies.
But I don't understand, because I had a computer myself when I was a teenager, and one of the I don't know whether it was called a Spectrum, and they had 48 kbytes, right? And but anyway, it took a while to load the game, and I would spend a lot of time playing games on the computer. I had a computer, but I read all of the classical literature, and then after that the Russian literature from A to Z. Well, I am exaggerating, but I read all of Dostoevsky, all of Tolstoy, Gorky, etc., and so on and so forth. I read it again, and then I went to the French literature. But now I am sometimes a bit cruel with my children, and when I get a bit upset, I tell them, look, it's like you are a chunk of meat without blood. What are your interests? I'm not asking you to become a mathematician or a physicist. It could be drawing blue elephants on the floor, but I want to see you at 3 a.m. drawing blue elephants on the floor, and I don't see any of that.
You know what, I've thought often, if I don't know how well I did it with my sons, my 2 sons, but I often think of it. If I were to raise a child now, I have a whole list how they would, some of the little children's literature. And you know A.A. Milne, Winnie the Pooh? Yeah. And there's even smaller, for smaller children. To build up to that, then to read perhaps Graf von Monte Cristo or
but I've tried that.
Or one of, and then move on up to Les Miserables, which had a terrific impression on me when I was 13. I think it impressed me immensely. But of course, I had already read not Graf von Monte Cristo, but what's the other? There's another famous one. I saw the Three Musketeers. One other Graf von Monte Cristo is better still. And then move on, Mark Twain and Jack London, and then...
Well, the list is infinite, but the list is endless.
Yes, but you can pick out certain things and leave the rest to them.
But I have
it's not
tried.
been done.
I have tried, and I thought, well, maybe it's partially because my children, and again, I was probably cruel, they are half German, and in my Spanish or whatever Iberian or South European Weltanschauung point of view.
On what?
Point of view.
On what point of view? What kind of point of view?
On my Spanish.
Yeah. Oh, I understood. Yeah.
German people, well, more reserved. They're not that as passionate, etc. But I thought, okay, well, they have this German, temper, which is fine, and maybe later, maybe they will emerge. But I moved to Spain, and I've seen exactly the same thing, but even orders of magnitude worse, because those older children, they didn't have anyone at home talking to them about history.
Which other?
Any child you can think of. So why isn't it picking up? Why isn't it sticking?
I don't think, frankly, I don't think that the people in charge of education in Germany today or in other countries, I don't think they're interested in having wise children, or really, they don't want to. They want somebody who can do their work and keep their mouth shut.
That's one of the possibilities. So
maybe not consciously. It's not a plan, but in general, that's why they're pushing these special schools. I don't think in the United States.
What are these?
No, these what do you call them? These away from the public schools to the what do they call it again? Where they pay a certain amount, but it's for the better children.
Of course.
And
as usual.
I don't think there's that much interest in the United States. Of course, you have this special education for special. Like I had 2 of these schools. I went to 9 different schools. 2 of them were private, so-called progressive schools, not politically progressive, but in education, in which you had small classes, individual more, and there was stress culture. But the public schools, I had some good teachers too, but there was little of that.
Yeah, but this is for instance what I wrote to you in the email. I told you, is it, so as you say, one possibility is that the system has achieved to create people, well, I was simplifying it, but anyway, I said some of them are slaves who do not even realize that they are slaves, which is so this is an achievement that not even the Romans managed to do, right?
Yeah.
But is it that simplistic?
Well, no, things are never completely simple, and you have elements in the States which I follow a little more closely than here, because I get this internet. I think there is definitely, from many levels, they think of a lot of lower class children, black children, Latino, poor children. It's good if they learn to read and write and to do numbers. That's enough. What else do they need? Basically. And I just read that 40% of Americans, when asked, could not name the three sections of the government, judiciary. They couldn't name them. Why should they? Should they be intelligent voters? You don't want intelligent voters. You want people who will be good citizens and keep their mouths shut. I think that's definitely, as I say, it's not always conscious policy, but it's their feelings. That's why charter schools, that's what they're called in the United States, charter schools. They get a charter, which it varies. Sometimes it's for the children with difficulties, black children with difficulties, but often it's for the better children. They pay something, they're supported by the government, and they're separate. And the public schools, it's just, you get them to finish their 6th or 8th grades, and what the hell? I think that's, sometimes it's even conscious policy. You have some billionaires, especially Gates and the Walton family, who have Walmart. They invest lots of money in education, and their stress is on people who will be good either in business or in mechanics, doing the hard work, but not in thinking or in revolutionary thinking. Of course not. That's taboo anyway. I think that sometimes it's conscious. The last Minister of Education or Secretary of Education was Trump, was this DeVos. She's the part of a billionaire family, and they did everything to cut the public schools, to make them worse. To stress, they stress these tests. The tests are how much they can read, how much arithmetic or mathematics they can do, and maybe writing a little, but not really, but nothing else.
But it's, I completely agree with you, and in Spain we have the same concept, and it's called escuelas concertadas.
As well as?
Concertadas. It's like, it's what you were saying, charter schools, right?
Yes.
It's the same thing.
And
in
Spain?
In Spain, yes. So we have completely private schools, then we have these concertadas, and they get money from the government.
Yeah.
Which I don't agree with, of course.
It's wrong.
It is completely wrong,
yes.
Because I am all in favor of public schools and public education. Right. Now, but is it so going? I am a bit stubborn. Going back to the problem, is it education the main problem, or are other things? Because other theses they have heard is that I have heard, for instance, a friend of mine was recently saying, you must understand, young people don't have a future these days. They do not know what is going to happen. Mm-hmm. But when I was 1 year old, I think, Franco died. And that transition was anything but stable. And the future was very uncertain as well. It was a period of economic growing, etc. But well, you could say, well, you were lucky. But what about German people after war? the future was very black. But they were enthusiastic, and they had things to be driven by, and to move on.
It's the people, by the way, whom I met in Spain, because we met with the last veterans of the Civil War, but also their children.
Yeah.
And their adherents. So we met this, very militant bunch. I'll tell you, to generalize, beyond education, by the way, was some grapes.
Yeah, don't worry.
You have to change your fix that. But you can also try some of these. If I can open it. You get a scissors.
You can open it if you want.
I have a scissors, but I have to get up to get it.
No, that's fine.
Here too, you need a scissors. No,
Okay.
here I don't need a scissors. So that's the unhealthy. These are a little more healthy. Yes, what I see in general, the whole situation in the world today, but especially based on the United States, which is, after all, still the strongest and the one I know best. I see the history of the United States, really, it sounds dogmatic, but I see it as a constant conflict between a small number of people who wanted millions and then billions, and the people who were supposed to supply it. And there was a constant conflict, and it went in waves. You know that the period after 1865, this Reconstruction period in the South, was the most progressive period in the United States history.
Yes.
Until 1867, when they crushed it. Then it built up again in the 1880s, 1890s. The so-called populists were based on farmers, but militant, anti-capitalist farmers. They were bought out by the Democratic Party, 1896. Then came the Wobblies, the IWW,
Yes.
who were fighting militant, mostly workers from the poorest fields, Wanderarbeiter, Wanderarbeiter. They were the lowest level, but the fighting ones, and with songs, lots of songs and enthusiasm, until World War I, which they opposed, and they were crushed. In the 1920s, there were small left-wing groups, but there were very little. But then came the Depression in the 30s, and you had this giant rise of militancy and fighting spirit, and millions joining unions and fighting back and winning. And of course you had Roosevelt, who wasn't a leftist, but he listened to them. He had to. And so the terrific movement until World War II. After World War II, the left tried to build on the 1930s movement, but they were crushed. Basically anti-Soviet, anti-Russian sentiments. They had a huge strike movement in 1945-46, and that frightened them. And they split the union movement, threw all the leftists out, and bought up the others. So that the 1950s were total reaction, both internally, the McCarthy period, which brought me here, but in the world, the Dulles, the whole business, in the 1950s. 1960s, you had the Civil Rights Movement, and then gradually you had, at the end, the anti-Vietnam War movement. It was no longer communist-led, but it was, which had been crushed, basically crushed. By 1948-49, they were, and 56 was the end of it with the Hungarian events. But in the 60s, a new, more independent student, more anarchist, less organized thinking, but still a fighting movement, which grew in the end of the 60s and the beginning of the 70s against the Vietnam War, and it was a huge movement until that too got split and broken. And this has occurred constantly over the U.S. history, and I think not only U.S. history, but U.S. history was dominant. And in the 1980s, there was again a movement against Reagan and so forth. But they managed. But then, with the end of the Soviets and here the whole Wende here, this pretty well broke the left movement in general in almost every country, and it took them years. They still haven't really recovered from it. The left to an organized international movement, but I see it. It was gradually building up again here, not only in various countries, until a year ago, the Ukrainian business was able to split the remaining left in two separate parts, and broke a lot of their strength. I'm now hoping that somehow they will get over this, and I took great hope in 3 weeks ago at that big rally, the Zaravagnecht. This was a sign that people were moving again and beginning to fight again, and rejecting the people who are leading all the parties and who are leading the Linke too, who sold out. They've sold out completely.
Yeah.
And
not all of them, by the way. Not all of them, but not all of them.
No, not all of them. But in the Linke party, a lot of the leaders, especially in Berlin, now they're paying for it because they're out of the government, they're out of everything. But you have this movement with Sarah Wagenknecht, which represents. She makes some mistakes, and she's not. But she's fighting, and we find that an awful lot of people want to fight back. The question is to organize them and to crystallize from that the ones from this movement and from that one from the other one. There's every attempt to split them up, like on the gender issue, to get them worrying about whether But the idea is to split people to start arguing.
Of course. I always say that the real thing is not fixed yet. Like women having exactly the same rights of men, having the same salary. In Spain, for instance, there is a very long and boring debate about linguistics. So should we say, it's like in the US, he, she, or my pronouns are, that's not important. That's not important.
I almost think it's consciously to get people on the wrong track.
Of course, that's a way.
Some of them do it with good intention, but it leads people away from the main question.
That's exactly the point. That is what they are looking for, to try to confuse people.
Even here now in the Linke, wondering whether to say he, she, or it, or it's such bullshit. It's so unimportant, especially with this trans business. How many trans people are there? Maybe a 1/10% or something. I don't know.
No, so that's a big problem in Spain as well, because this trans law got passed. So the trans law got accepted.
Yeah.
And that's a bad thing for women, because men can declare to be women now.
Yes.
And that leads to a lot of problems.
Yes. And unnecessary problems. Basically, there are so few who will come. There are not many.
Well, there are, of course.
It means a lot to them.
Of course, there are a few of them who really have a problem because they feel, etc., so on and so forth. But the main goal here, again, is to distract people.
Absolutely agreed.
But yes, I wanted to ask because you mentioned these oscillations, these fluctuations over time,
yes.
Right? So people getting organized and going back. So 2 questions. First of all, do you see a damping of those oscillations? So are they becoming smaller over time?
Which?
The oscillations, people getting organized and conscious about what is.
Are they getting smaller? No, look in France. You have over 1 million people demonstrating. That's not few, that's a lot of people. And here, getting 50,000 in Berlin, it's not the same as against Iraq. You had 500,000, but it's a lot. For years, there's been nothing so big.
I know what is happening now. I don't know what happened 50 years ago. I don't know what happened.
Well, 50 years ago is, let's see, that's the 70. Oh, well, that was a completely different thing, but that was still GDR, West Germany. And this was an example where as I see it, the same forces who were trying to crush any opposition, they had so many advantages in terms of money and in terms of skill and in terms of, especially in public relations, that they were able, and mistakes of our side, they were able to crush the main hope of humanity, as I see it, was the Soviets and socialism in the East. As I see it, was the one hope. Unfortunately, they did so many things wrong, and of course they were but they were always in the weaker position, historically and geographically. America was geographically much stronger, and historically much stronger industrially, and West Europe was much stronger than East Europe, and West Germany was much stronger than East Germany. Played an important part, that they were always on the defensive on the East, and they proved to be too strong in the West, and in the East not strong enough, and also add in the blunders and mistakes that were made and the weaknesses. But basically, I compare it to a football game between Bayern and Dortmund. If Bayern wins, it's not because they're morally better, but because they're stronger. The West was stronger, and it set back history, I think, 100 years, or you can say 50 years, whatever, but it set it back because the Soviet Union was not acting as a magnet as it should have, but still it was preserving the basic idea. The basic thing for me is doing that these billionaire companies do not rule the world. The big oil companies, the big armaments companies, the big pharma companies, the big Amazon, Facebook, they're controlling the world more and more today. Not 100%, but it's getting closer and closer with their billionaires, and they don't want any rivalry. And the Soviets and China too, despite contradictions, they both have China has its billionaires,
yeah.
But nevertheless, they were a barrier against the billionaires.
They have the billionaires, but they're controlled. They cannot do whatever they want.
The billionaires
in China.
In China, no, exactly. Then that's one reason why they have to be beaten, according to them. They have to beat them. Also, simply because China is very big and wealthy, but also because China has kept a control of those billionaires, and they don't. I think they really were out for world hegemony, and I think that's in back of the Ukrainian situation.
Of course.
But you see, of course, but not too many people see it.
Yeah, I know that. That's what I would say again.
I was wondering about you with your on the other hand.
This thing's for my daughter. No.
I was wondering.
No.
Because you see yellow and black every place.
Yeah, no.
And there's white there too, and green.
No,
yeah.
This is from my daughter. It used to be pink, but the pink has washed out.
Yeah. In any case, they're out to take over the world, and Russia, despite all, I don't love Putin, but despite and it has its oligarchs, etc., but it's still a barrier against the world controlled by Gulf Oil and Shell and Amazon and the armaments pillars. In every field they have 5 or 6 companies now. But of course the worst of all, I think, Amazon, Facebook, Twitter in the mental field, also the media, including, say, Disney, and of course the the armament companies. They're the strongest. Northrop and Raytheon and Boeing, etc. And they're out to control the world. And they don't have 100% control in the United States, but the United States about 80-90%. If they want something done, they get it done. They control so many in the Congress, in both parties. And I see that my job, as long as I can do it, and I would say everybody, it should be everybody's job, to stop them and to fight them with every means possible. And I see a few good signs. That one near the Brandenburg Gate, you weren't there, were you? With the Wagenknecht?
I wasn't there because I was in Spain.
This was really something. They tried it. It scared them about how they're really afraid, because you had 50,000 people from all over the country coming and demonstrating, and they tried to say it's AFT and it's right. There were people who were out for peace, and they may not agree on everything, and they may not understand everything, but they know they don't want war there. And this was a hopeful sign, if they can keep it going.
Do you think so? Even with the government looking away when the U.S. blows their oil pipes?
Well, the government belongs to the USA when it comes down. Although, interesting with the Germany, I think you have some forces here, the main forces now, who belong to the United States in major issues. But you have a certain group who agree with the United States in opposing Russia, but they're still dreaming of what they dreamt of in 1914 and in 1940, that they want to be, at least control Eurasia. Maybe the United States will, but at least Eurasia to Germany, hurrah. And you have them too. But they're more like, I think, Baerbock. That's the kind. I think. Well, no, she's pro-American. But you have some who are less pro-American than hurrah Germany. But it doesn't matter, because they agree on one thing: just destroy Russia and get another Yeltsin back in Russia, who they can control, and then go on to China. And I think you said, what can we do anything to build that movement, which was, I just hope that Sarah and other good people, have you followed Sevim Dagdalin? You know who she is?
Yes.
She's better than Sarah. Although Sarah is the best orator in Germany. She's a wonderful speaker. I don't know if you've ever heard her. Oh, she's terrific. But Sevim Dagdalin is, I think, politically clearer than Sarah. But it doesn't matter. All those forces, if they can consolidate, this could be. And you know where it is beginning to happen? In the United States. Tomorrow. You know about it?
No.
Tomorrow, the 18th, there's going to be I hope, huge demonstration in Washington against the war. And not only against the Ukraine war, no weapons for Ukraine, peace, also a good position on Palestine, a good position on China. Stop no war against China and no build up. And also with domestic questions too. Money for schools and so forth. And they're trying to they have a whole 100 organizations. Most of them are very small organizations. Some of them are bigger. None of them are very big peace organizations. But they seem to be combining, and the problem was in the United States, and here too, but in the United States, you had your black movement, you had your women's movement, you had your LBQ movement, you had all these different movements, each for their own thing. The peace movement, which was most important, was one of the smaller ones. It looks, maybe, we'll see tomorrow, as if maybe the peace movement will be able to combine them all in one real fight, stop the war and put the money into our own, for people here in this country.
Are you that optimist?
Yes.
Because, for instance, when I saw what happened in Chile,
In Chile,
they were voting the new constitution.
yes.
You know that, for instance, Pinochet, one of the things he did was to increase the taxes of books a lot.
Under Pinochet or now?
But it's still that law is still active.
Well, still now,
Yes. So if you want buying a
with
book,
Mostage,
buying a book in Chile is something extremely expensive.
really.
Yes. Which is a way to get people not to read books.
Of course.
But they wanted to vote. You know what happened in Chile, and all of these the big demonstrations, big
Yes.
riots in streets, etc. And when it came to vote the constitution, the new constitution, that failed.
Yes.
And after it had failed, people said, well, it's good that we have stopped this now, because we have to get our hands on much more important topics like public health, public education. I said, well, that's what the constitution was about.
Yes.
And you stopped it.
Well, the media are very strong.
Yes, which is why I'm asking you, are you that optimist about tomorrow?
Well, about the media, it's a terrible situation. Actually, they own almost everything. But it means, as I see it, every means possible to break a little bit of their control, and it can start small. What I dream of is something like a Bildzeitung for the left. In fact, I hoped at my birthday party, Saturday, to talk to Daniela Don. You know, she was there. She's a left-wing journalist, and a good one. And to get people like her and Zara and Sevi and others to start, maybe not in the printed press, because that's not so strong these days, but in a social media, to build up some kind of a program which especially young people like to watch and listen to. Maybe at first once a week, and then maybe twice a week.
But that's the problem with the left, right? The right wing has a very clear and easy to understand message.
Yes.
For instance, immigrants are bad, full stop. That's very easy to understand.
That's what happened in the East with the AfD. The people wanted to protest. People in East Germany were angry, disappointed, and angry at their treatment since 1990. And at first they turned to the left, to the Linke. But the Linke became strong, so strong because of that they got into the state governments. And they were part of the establishment. And as part of the establishment, they didn't fight so hard. And the people still wanted to protest. And since the Linke was not protesting that very loudly, they turned to the AfD, which was very protest. The problem today is to get the Linke back as a protest movement. And that's the big job today, and it's not easy. But it's perhaps not impossible. It's necessary, let's put it that way. Possible or not, we need to do it. And I was very happy, that the Linke in Berlin is not einheitlich. It's not all of them are for this, Schubert and this bunch of leaders who is sold out completely. There are others who are good, especially in West Berlin, more than East Berlin.
Yeah.
And they helped organize this big demonstration. And not only that, but in another week or two, they want to have another demonstration. This one not on the peace issue, basically, but support the strikers in Charité and in all that were striking and fighting. And but making it a broader meaning, to give it a broader meaning. This means that a part of the Linke is moving leftward. The big question today is, shall I stop?
No.
The big question today is, as I see it, will the Linke, which is still controlled by these right-wing people, will it split? And if it splits, it could mean that both go down the drain, the East and the strong, they both. But it could also mean, and therefore I was opposed to any split. But recently somebody talked to me about this and said that recent polls, Umfragen, indicate that the position of Zara would, if you divide it, would be about 8 or 10%, and of these old-fashioned sellout artists, 2%.
Uh-huh.
So maybe it would be good if they can't take over the Linke, the left. Maybe they should start a new one. I don't know.
But then the way I run into the same snack that Spain had during the Civil War. There was a very strong left, but it was divided, strongly divided.
Was it?
Yes.
You're not speaking about the Barcelona POUM people.
I'm talking about communists fighting anarchists and anarchists fighting. This is what led to.
No, that was this 1 week in Barcelona in May '37. There was a real fight where they shot each other. But this lasted really only about a week. It was terrible. But it was not I think in general.
But I mean, that weakened a lot.
Of course.
A lot of forces.
Yeah, the people, the billionaires, or the 1% you could call, they'll do everything to split. And there are some people who like to split, if only for personal reasons, because they have a nice job. But that's part of the fight, to break through and whether it's to split, which could be dangerous. Mm-hmm. But if it's true that the militant left is much stronger, it's possible that if it splits, it could then grow, whereas the other can't grow. That's the question. I don't know.
That's the one thing that is worrying me, and the other thing is how do you reach out to young people? Because and this brings me back again to one of my first questions.
So important.
Because the attention span has reduced from young people, and I've never been young. I think I was old all of my life. But the duration of those videos is getting smaller and shorter and shorter.
No, look what happened in the United States when what's his name? When Sanders came. You had 10, 20, 30,000 people going to hear him, mostly young people, and open to the question of socialism, which he introduced, which had been taboo until then. He said, we want socialism. Of course, his idea of socialism may be a little different than mine, but it's still basically against the big monopolies, and that he is. And he had 10, 20, 30,000, almost all young people, who vote left. It's not so, you shouldn't, and I think there's some of that here too. When they have big demonstrations, well, not this peace demonstration, it wasn't, but a demonstration a couple of years ago against racism, mostly young people. You have to be careful of generalizing. It's a question, as you say, how to reach them and organize them. Because a lot of young people are really leftist in their ideas. They reject the old, what they consider the old people's ideas, including Marxism for many cases. But they're ready to fight, and the thing is to lead them in fighting. And somehow we have to learn that. And I don't want to suffer from any illusions, false optimism. But still, there are good signs. As I say, in England you had more people striking than in 30 years. And in France, my God, every week 1 million go out on the streets. You know, that's something. And even in Italy, which is completely shot up, the party system, the leftist Nevertheless, when they had big demonstrations in the north, they had thousands going there. It's possible to reach them. The trick is trying to figure out how. What I try in my little way with my bulletins, but I don't reach many people, but I try and they get sent out, and I've gotten a lot of very good responses on this. People who say, thanks for saying things that you don't hear in the press.
Yes.
Which just makes me very happy, of course.
Of course, yes. But again, I don't see the average teenager cannot focus, I would say, more than 30 seconds on one topic. Have you seen them they have like
if you get them marching on the street, it takes longer than 30 seconds, there was a couple of hours.
But if you want to explain something to them, and they say, look, they are betraying or they are cheating on you. They are telling you this, but this is not like this. It's like that. How do you do that?
Well, the only thing to do is to try it as best you can. Naturally, everything is going to be against you. From the top, they're trying to crush it. Just look in the press. By the way, didn't you mention this business with Seymour Hersh and his?
Yes.
Did you notice too? In the media for weeks, they didn't even mention it.
Of course, now they are putting him in doubt.
But phony. They say he has only one source and it's anonymous. Well, of course, if I were a source, I'd be anonymous too, because if he names who it is, he's dangerous.
Yes.
He can't name it, and of course, journalists don't name their sources anyway. They don't. Nobody does. But they're looking for some excuse. But they just didn't even mention it for weeks. Although it was the main, even if they disagree with it and they think it's crazy, they didn't mention it. It was a silence, which meant they were afraid of it. And of course they're afraid of it, because if it turns out, I hope that he has some more evidence maybe. If somehow it can be proven true or very likely, it looks so terrible for Germany and for USA.
Of course, they're trying, he and Germany, they play in death, because destroying such a thing, it is like a declaration of war, right?
It is. I just read 2 days ago an internet where there was an analysis of this new idea that 6 Ukrainians in a boat, they said the equipment needed to blow up those pipelines is much too heavy to put in any small boat. They couldn't.
Of course not. And there was this long discussion, and they voted them a long time and a lot of discussion for this nonsense.
Of course it's nonsense, but they had nothing else. They just didn't have any. Well, those things help us, because I think a lot of young people, too, will see that that's impossible.
Do you think?
I don't know. I don't know, but I think most people, young and old, didn't really believe it was the Russians who did it. It's so nonsense that why they would do it. It's their own pipeline. And it was so obvious that America wanted it, because for years they've been trying to stop the pipeline.
Yeah.
So it's so obvious that they did stop it. It's so obvious that I think most people at least have doubts, and I think a lot of them will say, don't you think so?
I don't know, because again, after my going back to Spain, for instance, I met a friend of mine whom I had not seen for over 20 years, and I had a very good opinion of him. He's well educated. He went to university. Doesn't mean anything these days. But he was, he had criticism, and he could talk about things. And I made a comment. So we met by chance on the street and said, let's have a coffee one of these days. And I made a comment about the war, and he said, "Oh, come on, you cannot compare authoritarian Russia with democratic EU. And I said, I beg your pardon, democracy, what's that? Do we have democracy in the EU? And he said, okay, we'd rather not meet, and I don't want to talk to you. Full stop.
He said that.
Yes. And this is one of the person.
It means it's changing. He'd have to change his whole view, and he's not ready to rethink everything, I guess. It's not easy to rethink everything you've been thinking. It's not easy. I'll tell you something interesting from my college days. When as a communist at college, we had meetings with the other colleges in New England, with the communists there. And at one of them, Smith College, there was a woman who led the group there. She was very intelligent, and she built a whole group around herself of leftists. And she had a trick. She said, when I discuss politics with people, what I do is, who differ greatly with me, different position, I always try to find, as quickly as possible, some very simple thing where we agree on. So we agree on that, and then I try to build up step by step from that. That sounds very simple, but I think that there's something to it. That if you can dig down and find that, of course, you agree that such a thing isn't true, and then you build up from there. That's the art of course, journalism too. Doing the same thing in journalism. Basically, it's what I try to do with my bulletin. That's why I've been attacked from both sides with my bulletin. I'm too pro-Putin and I'm too anti-Putin, both. Because I can't approve the war. At the same time, I can't approve the other side, which really provoked the war. And to try to make that clear to people in the United States who get this, like your friend, they get it hammered in every day, every hour, that this kind of story. Authoritarianism, etc., and EU. I've found one thing, which I think, in my thinking generally, which I think is important for people to think over. It's not a new idea, but the question of democracy and freedom, analyzing it, you find that the countries with the most democracy or the most freedoms and least repressive are United States, Britain, France, West Germany, these countries generally, as northern countries.
But you know that these things,
Huh?
you know that they actually avoided the word democracy when they first wrote their constitutions.
Yeah, yes, the republic was the question.
Yes.
Yes, but these countries are relatively unrepressive. Relatively, they do their repression too. We see Assange, for example, and many others. But still, you can get out on the street and say what you want, and if you find the money, you can put out a little newspaper which nobody reads, but you're allowed to. There's a reason for this, I find. I find that every government, no matter what its nature, communist, capitalist, socialist, fascist, its main idea is to preserve itself and preserve its system, sometimes preserve it personally, but at least its system, which means that you have to try to see to it that about at least 2/3 of your population is more or less satisfied and not rebellious. If about 2/3, not being exact, but something like 2/3 are more or less satisfied and don't want to change the world or their regime, then you can allow certain freedoms. Because who's going to listen to these radicals with their little newspapers or their speeches? No, nobody important. It's no danger. As things get worse economically, if they do, say, another crisis,
Yeah.
then you have to think of tricks to keep those 2/3 at least from being rebellious.
But that's easy, right?
And the tricks are, first of all, election tricks, that they only have Democrats or Republicans to vote for. That's a trick, so that they don't have a choice. The second trick, the media in general, first distract them with football and celebrities and all kinds of, and fashions and accidents and so forth, but away from the main issues. The next trick is to get one group against the other. White against black, North against South, Catalan against Castellanos, or North against South, or old timers against immigrants. They get them fighting so that they don't fight against them. If that all doesn't work, then you have to resort to violence. Then you have to, which is, for example, Macron has had to in this weekend. Then you have to resort to violence. Whether it's a communist government or a fascist government or a capitalist government, doesn't matter. The main thing is you have to keep your control. And if you don't have it, so that's the one half of the story. The other half of the story is, how do you keep 2/3 of your country satisfied? In countries like the USA and Britain and Spain to a degree, but West Germany and so forth, they do it by exploiting the people in West Africa or in South Asia who pick coffee for pennies, or this cobalt stuff, dig it out with their hands, or pick tea leaves in India, or sew dresses in Bangladesh in terrible conditions, and they get pennies, and that means you can sell it in your own country cheap and keep people satisfied. So basically, you're preserving democracy at the cost of the people you're exploiting.
Of course.
And you're in your own country too, the people who are poor. In Spain, it's the people picking fruit in the south, or in the United States, in California, etc.
Yes, or if you see
but people don't see that their freedoms.
They see it. They cannot not see a person sleeping in the street.
True.
You have to turn your eyes. You have to just pretend you're blind.
But people get used to it.
They get, that's the problem. They get. I cannot get used to that.
No, I can't either.
But people, I took a picture the other day of an old man sleeping inside. So probably it was an ATM and it had a door, and somebody had been kind enough to open the door to let that person sleep in there, and probably
where
in Spain. So probably the person who opened the door went home with this, feeling of I did something nice to them.
Like someone who gave him €2.
Yes. But I wanted to say something. But the problem is that you named it. So so say in the 20s, people would go to work too many hours a week, and come back home and say, my boss is a son of a bitch because this and that happened, and I am hungry, I don't have enough things to eat, etc. Now you see people coming from tramway, S-Bahn, whatever, 5, 6 a.m., you see them, they are grey, they are depressed, but they don't have the time to realize about it. First of all, because they have the cell phone, and they have this TikTok or whatever videos. They get home, and before they can say something bad happened or I hate my boss, they don't have time to realize that they hate their bosses, because they switch on the TV.
Yeah, but listen.
And the most important thing, and I will finish, they have things to eat. Even if it's extremely bad quality and the cheapest of all possible food, they have their belly full. And it takes it to get to cannibalism, like in Tsar Russia, to realize that you have to change things.
Yeah, but even in rich Germany, evidently a lot of people having it harder and harder to pay their rent. They're being forced to move out of their home.
Oh yes.
And not only that, many people are now finding it hard to pay for butter. And this is the question: when will this 2/3 I said, which is just not exactly. When do you reach a point where they start getting rebellious? Who knows if next year Germany may be more prosperous than ever, but maybe not. In the United States, 3 banks have failed.
Well,
maybe we'll have another 2007 or 8. Who knows?
Look at Credit Suisse.
Yeah. We don't know. But as I see it, there has to be a crisis sooner or later. It has to go down.
It is inherent to the capitalist system.
Yeah, it belongs. It has to. And the main thing is, we should try as hard as possible to be prepared for that time. At least a framework, so that when people start getting angry, they have a place to go to fight. That's important. So that they don't only then start, because of course what the people on top will do, if they see the people getting rebellious, they'll throw fascists to organize them. The main thing is that the left wing has to organize an opposition which may not be so big and strong, but it's ready if things get worse, that we're there for them. Of course, I don't say we should wait. We should start now, because there are lots of people now having a tough time. But the main thing is to have some kind of a framework organized to fight back. The unions are that, except a lot of them have sold out, but not all of them. Verdi has been fighting hard, and metal fights too. They've been bought up, but if they start closing down more auto factories, as they are, people are going to get angry, and that's an awful lot of. That's the wealthiest of the workers. So that it seems to me, nobody knows who's going to win in the end. Maybe there'll be an atomic war next year. Who knows? But as far as I can see it, I see my duty, as long as I can, to try and approve a building up of a framework which fights now and is ready to fight even harder when the conditions are easier for it. And this also means, in terms of education, of course, trying to get youngsters to think more, to read more. That's part of it. And to read the right things, of course, not the junk that they get.
All that junk that they get, because I read a little bit of trash books also when I was a teenager. For instance, maybe you know that one because it was U.S. of North America collection of books called the Hollisters, I think.
What?
Hollisters, something like that. It was a family, I have found out, so it was a very simplistic book describing, the family, whatever. It was not Tolstoy. So they have simplified versions of those books these days, because seemingly children cannot read the Hollisters, for instance.
What do you call it again?
I don't know, it was the whole Hollysters, I guess.
I don't know.
It's better that you don't know that. But I was just to spend some time.
Except that I sometimes think, with some children, it's better if they read junk than if they don't read anything, because it means at least they can read. And then it's easier to get them to move upwards than if they don't read anything. If they just, like these 2 girls, they don't read anything. All they do is look at these damn things or read comics. But even getting them to read junk, or say just crime or whatever, or porno, at least to get them used to opening a book is already a sort of progress. I think it can, of course, completely ruin them, but at the same time, it could lead them a little further. By the way, my son, my youngest son, till he was 9, he wouldn't read. Just like these two girls, he wouldn't read. My older son read a lot. My younger son, we tried with children's books, we tried with adventure books. He wouldn't read until we went on vacation to Poland for a couple of weeks. And at the beach there, my wife had her book and I had my book and the older brother had a book. And the only children there were Polish, he couldn't understand them. So he had nothing to do. So we gave him, I think it was Graf von Monte Cristo. And he got into that and he started reading. Sometimes it's a trick to get them to reading.
Yes, but I'm talking about children who are 17, 18 years old.
Yes. If it's already, yeah. Even then, though, there are books I think which, if you can get them at least to start reading it, they'll get picked up by the suspense of the story, a good story. I think Anna Karenina or even Raskolnikov is not easy to start with. He was starting pretty high. I would start with something which is very dramatic, full of suspense, if possible not bad literature, good literature, but easy. Jack London, for example, you know?
Yeah.
Or Mark Twain. They're easy reading. And they catch, but with Jack London, but the suspense. You know that story about lighting a fire?
Yes.
Something like that, just to get them reading.
I know, this is what I used to read, but
yeah.
Yeah.
It gets people to read. And if they read that, then they'll read maybe the next thing by Jack London about the wild dogs.
Yeah, I know that one as well. It's called
White Fang.
In Spanish called White Fang.
Yeah, and there are others, of course. He wrote a lot of junk too, but of course nothing's 100%. But it's an attempt to get them just to read things that are full of suspense, quick to.
It didn't work out for me.
It didn't work out with your girl, with your children.
Boy, yes.
Well, sometimes it doesn't work out, or maybe when they're older. Who knows?
This is what I'm saying. I'm expecting or hoping that someday you will emerge.
Yeah, but maybe. Well, does he go to the movies? They don't even go to the movies nowadays. That's what she told me. I was surprised.
This is what I'm asking. So, what is driving you in life? What is driving you in life?
Because film, you don't have to even read. You just sit there and watch, and it could be fun. And I tried to get this woman who comes here with her 2 daughters. You know the Babylon Kino where you are. They have these long silent films with orchestra.
Yes, I know.
Really a fine thing. And the Chaplin films. I said, if you bring your daughters to see Gold Rush or one of the other Chaplin films, they have to laugh.
I brought my kids there to
Yeah.
well, maybe yes, the Chaplin movies.
They have to laugh.
They laughed, yes, but that did not trigger anything.
They didn't?
Didn't trigger anything. Did that not trigger further action on the side?
Then give them a story about Chaplin's love affairs in the United States. Maybe that'll catch them. You know, he had all kinds of troubles.
Yeah, I know that.
But no, I'm not necessarily that. But
why not?
Something that's also very funny, something really humorous stuff, where they have to laugh. That's something which everybody likes to do, is to laugh. Everybody.
But I'm talking about my children, but it's not necessarily them. And as I was saying at the beginning, they are actually, I see very good qualities in them, but dormant qualities, so latent. qualities, right?
A dominant, yeah.
Yes, but in other kids of the age, I don't even see an interest in sex.
Really. I've read that about the United States now.
How is that possible?
Yes, I can't understand. They say the girls, especially, they're afraid. The men are rotten, or are hard, and not somehow it's not working. They say in the States. I read articles about it. Of course, I'd have to be careful about generalization. Obviously, that doesn't come everybody,
No.
but evidently there's a tendency. There's a tendency to even be
So what is it that?
Of course, so that they can see porno on TV. They don't have to worry about a boyfriend or a girlfriend. They have it in there.
It's much more different, right?
It's not the same.
It's not the same.
It's nothing like the same. But if they've had bad relationships with a boyfriend, it's easier. And there's no worry, for example, about a boyfriend treating you nastily. I think among the girls especially. Because boys are not taking it seriously. They're going out on dates. All they want is sex. My wife worried about this so much that the whole sex has been deteriorated so much from her romantic ideas. It's the way it should be, a growing into of young kids, of young girls, especially, but boys too, gradually developing relationships to just cutting it off and having with 13, 14 just plain affairs. It is a bit of a pity.
Yes, but for both, for the boys and for
Yes,
the girls.
for both.
But as I was saying, it is not even, they're not even interested in that materialistic plain sex.
Yeah.
It's like nothing is interesting anymore.
It's sad. And I wouldn't universalize it. It's not everybody, but it's too many.
And I don't want to be a pessimist and say that there is no hope for humanity. I just want to understand where all of this is coming from. My suspicion is that this is coming from neoliberalism.
Yeah.
And a very uncertain future with combined with what?
Except that what I think you should see too, there are Gegentendenzen. That's what I've been trying to say, actually. They're Gegentendenzen. It's not all one way. There are tendenzen also in the third world where they're rediscovering old culture. And that's spreading even to the north. There's a great interest for African culture in Britain and in other countries. There are tendencies in the other direction. The main thing is, what I see practically is the Linke should have been developing just that. I suggested, that in Turkey, Nazım Hikmet?
Yes.
Nazım Hikmet's, I think it was his 50th anniversary of his death, came up. And I suggested they should have an evening with Turkish poetry and music and German poetry and music for a mixed group to try and organize it, even on a small scale. Because I found that among Turkish people, even if they're not leftist, there's a love for Nazım Hikmet, interestingly. Although they know he was a communist, but he was a national poet. And they don't have that many, I guess. And he wrote some poetry which was very, you might say patriotic, but home-loving, home country loving. And I think there's a few sentences, they all seem to know it. I found a taxi driver, oh yes, he knew that already. The left should be building on that, not only on international, Turkish German, or Kurdish German, but also simply among Germans to build on the classics and the modern classics.
That's another thing. For instance, you have heard that Russian artists, in particular musicians, have been banned in Europe. Like, for instance, I think it was the Amsterdam Philharmony had a kind of a new rule of not playing any Russian. So this is not. This is very subtle. This is not just a gesture of war against Russia. We're going to do this stupid thing. I think is even worse than that. This is I think a way of alienating Europe from Russia.
Yes,
So
definitely.
that you and I, we know who's Tchaikovsky, and but my children know who this person is, but maybe their children will not know, and will regard this Russian thing as some exotic, far thing.
Yes, it obviously is a dangerous, nasty business. But what I'm saying is there are counter tendencies, and the duty of anybody who realizes this, like you or like me, is to support every counter tendency in the hopes that we'll get someplace. Because there are places where there's a Durchbruch. Not nearly enough, but just like in the whole economic question, you don't know how things are going to work out. Maybe it's a lost cause, but maybe not. Maybe there are fashion like the folk music fashion in the 60s, which I was part of basically. People would have laughed at that music 10 years earlier, but suddenly it's partly good public relations work, but it's partly somehow it caught people in and these folk music became immensely popular. Things change, and the job of any progressive is to do whatever he can or she can to push any spot, even if it's a tiny little spot, to push it and to try and join with others in doing it. I'm too old now, but there are groups in fact there's a group in Berlin, the Left International, in English. Do you know of it?
No.
A couple of people started it. It's for people in Berlin from other nationalities to meet together in English, since a lot of them didn't know German, and discuss current affairs. And often to invite from each country somebody to present their country, the situation in their country, to the others. And I was part of it for quite a while, and it was often very interesting because we had Greek, Turkish, Spanish, quite a few Spanish people who lived in West Berlin because of the exodus of young people. But there are also left-wing groups there working. I don't know if you know of them, but there are organizing, and also Spanish, also French, Italian too, but Spanish is one of the biggest, and Turkish, and politically I am not completely happy about them, but they've done good things and they're always at demonstrations with big banners and so forth on women's rights, but also on peace, on negotiations. This guy's a little English guy. He's worked like a workhorse to organize this, and I can show you their program. They got 6 different things going on. They take part in all kinds of demonstrations, but they also have their own. They have a summer camp, and they're trying to organize foreign. Of course, there's an awful lot of foreign-based people in Berlin to organize them in connection with the Linke. I think he's also opposed to these right-wing, this bunch of what's his name, the boss. I always forget his name. I forget names, unfortunately. That's all I can say is, that's why I keep pushing myself. I could say to hell with it. I'm going to just sit down and take it easy and start reading. You know, my project was for years and years and years to read all of Shakespeare chronologically. And I got started on it. I got about 2/3. And then I was on a trip away and interrupted it. I haven't yet gotten back into it.
But you had you 2/3 of
Shakespeare.
of satisfaction.
Yes. Oh, it amazed me. Because I had seen a lot of these plays, or as films or as plays, and read a lot at school and so forth, so I knew quite a few of the better known ones. But I found, first of all, when you get used to this old English, they're so beautifully written, and so well written as plays.
Oh, this is why they are called classicals, right? Because they are always interesting. I always say, if you have had these very smart people devoting their lives to something and putting it in black and white and handing it over to you, you will be an idiot if you refuse to read it.
When I was with my son, we were on vacation on the Mediterranean coast north of Valencia, between Valencia and Tarragona. There's a beautiful a hotel there where she had a regular partner, which she let us use. And in those weeks, I read Don Quixote again, because in English or German, in English. And of course, it was nice to read it in Spain and to enjoy it, really, because it's good reading.
Yes, there's a lot of scatology and jokes. And
yes, it's really good. It's good read. That's what I should have answered my granddaughter when she said, "Why should I read this stuff?" The answer is because it's good reading. That's why they're famous, because people like to read them, and they're still good.
Well, my answer to that is because if you do not do that, it's like you are spending all of your whole life in this room.
Yes.
And when you
but they don't understand that.
You open a door, you find another room.
Yeah.
And then you get out of that room again.
People don't understand that often. But if I say it's fun to read them, you don't want to stop when you get into a good book. You want to keep reading. That's the main reason for reading it. Otherwise, nobody would read them anymore. With Dante, it's not so easy, but Don Quixote is good reading.
It is.
It is long, but it's good reading. And Shakespeare too.
Yeah, I agree.
Shakespeare too. They're very beautiful. I'm going to start again, but with internet. I don't have a handy, but with internet and newspapers and stuff, I just don't get to really reading much. I go to sleep when I start reading that book. I have a whole pile, just that little pile is all waiting to be read. And I have lots more, which I want definitely to read. I wonder if I'll ever get to it. Probably not.
You should probably, I don't know whether you know this one, the True Believer, it's called. The True Believer.
True Believer. What is that?
It's from a US philosopher. And it is about how easy or difficult it is to convince mass about an idea, to convey the idea that this or that is good to the big masses of people. I forgot the author now. But this person was working in a harbor, unloading ships. And then he started writing The True Believer. I forgot the name.
I'll look it up.
But in any case, so just to sum up on this topic, you are optimist, and you think that we can, profit the next oscillation to have a framework ready.
I must confess, I'm a little less of an optimist than I was at one time. I used to go to I did an awful lot of lecturing, talking in the GDI days, an awful lot. I went all around the country giving talk. because I was one of the few Americans here, and one of the very few who spoke, and one of the almost none. And they wanted to hear about USA in the GDR, because they couldn't go there. And so I went all around trying to convey a more realistic view that the United States was neither that terrible country that they read about in the press or in the school books, but also not the wonderful one that they saw on television. You know, that it was neither. It was both, and it was a country of conflicts. That's what I tried to convey, because that's what it is. But now I've forgotten what I wanted to say about these people I spoke to. I've forgotten. I'll think of it later. So now I don't get to speak to many people, but I try in my little way with my bulletin and my books, especially this last one I wrote. You know, the Spanish defector, the socialist defector, which has no great readership, but it hit with some people, because what's hit me so hard in writing, in compiling it, I read a lot of these reports about people being thrown out of their homes in the United States.
Oh,
in one city, 16,000. In many, where was it, in city in Milwaukee, being thrown out of their homes with nothing, and onto the streets. And then I read about people lining up from 4 a.m. around the block to get medical or dental treatment, or loaded with $30,000-$40,000 debt from college, which they never pay off until they die.
So you see these lines on the street, which probably you also saw when you were a child.
Which one?
These lines,
yeah,
of people in the street waiting to get something, like you probably saw in New York, right?
And I compare that with the GDR. Well, we didn't even, these people waiting online to get food, is tafel.
Yes.
We didn't even know what that is in GDR. Never heard of it, because nobody had that.
Because, well, that was the problem, right? People were taking all of these things for granted.
You didn't have to pay a penny for medical care, for dental care, for prescription drugs, for school, for kinder. People, a huge problem in the States, they can't pay for child care. It's so expensive. One in a couple, the one works just to pay for child care. It's impossible. Here it was free, and we were really couple of steps ahead in civilization.
I agree with you.
But they don't know that, of course. They don't know it, and they in America they still think they have the best in the world, and they have almost the worst in the world, at least in the industrialized world. And it's painful to see how they suffer. And I try to present that as best I can.
Yeah, and you see this kind of it's like it's like a UNESCO. It is so absurd that it is almost funny. I went to a university in the U.S. because they wanted to hire me. I'm not going to say which one, but on the last day I was there for 1 week, and on the last day. The wife of this professor took me for a ride, and we went to a very nice neighborhood in a kind of a natural park, and I saw a lot of houses, and I said, so people are living here? And she said yes, and the housing here is very cheap. And I said, but it's a very nice area. If I ever considered to move here, I would probably look for a house here. She said, no, you don't want that. And I said, why? And she said, well, this is the black part of the city. I said, oh, so it's dangerous. And she said, no, it's not dangerous. They're very nice. So what is the problem? No, you wouldn't feel comfortable, and they would not feel comfortable. Why? Well, because it would be very strange. And then while driving, we passed across a church. And this was a very colorful church because some parts of it were green, others yellow, orange. And I said, oh, look at that beautiful church. And she said, black church. And I said, no, it's not black.
Yeah.
It's yellow. No, oh, no, you know, black people go there. Oh, so they sing gospels and so on. I said, yes. Could we go there? I said, no. That would be very strange. Why would they get angry? No, but they would probably ask you to give a speech. Say, well, I can do that. Would you? No, just let's drive on. Let's drive on. So that concept is very strange.
You know, I'll tell you a similar story. A woman from the GDR, she taught literature, including American literature. And she had a chance, which was not so easy in those days, to visit the States. And she was in San Francisco, and in Oakland, Berkeley. Do you know that area at all? Doesn't matter. Berkeley is connected with the university.
Yeah.
Oakland was largely black, and no longer, but it was largely black.
Yeah.
So she was staying with a family from the university in Berkeley, and they were off to work, and she had a day free, and she wanted to see she heard there's a Jack London Square where I think he lived, and she wanted to see was the monument there or a tafel or something like that. So she took her camera when they were away and started walking there. Well, soon she came to the border. The border, there is no border, but white, black. And she kept walking towards where she was going. She had the map, and it was all black. And she went to this Jack London Square, and it wasn't much. I think it was a tafel or something, no statue. And when she got back in the evening, they said, where were you? She told them, what? You went to Oakland? All through Oakland? As a white person? And even with a camera, they couldn't believe it. And it was just it was a real dividing line, just like you say.
But that sometimes that dividing line is like across the street. You say, no, that's a dangerous water. You don't go there. You stay here. But I was asking, why don't they come over? If that's a pool, it's like I'm not exaggerating. It was like 5 meters across the street. I say, why don't they come over and rob here? I don't understand it.
Yeah. At the same time, among young people watching television, you saw in these recent years in demonstrations and protests and so forth, an awful lot of mixing. So black and white and Asian and Indian, and they were together. It was all mixed up. You see that now in all demonstrations almost. And this is a sign of the times too. An awful lot of young people, but of course it's especially the educated young people. Not so much in the working class, but I think there too. This has changed since I was there. When I was there, I had a black girlfriend in a restaurant. We were not served. Or they let us wait an hour, or we got stared at in New York. And but today that's different. That's different. Even here, you would, in the old days, you'd rarely seen a mixed couple. Now you see mixed couples all the time. Things have changed. And in general, I refuse to become a total pessimist. As I say, that's what I was going to say. That back in those early in the 1970s or 60s, I'd say, when my father was young, there was not a socialist country in the world. When he was 19, there was one. Then in 1945, when I was 17, there were 8 or 9. Today, there are about 20 because of African countries that said they were socialist. I said, and of course they looked at me because they hadn't seen the India, they hadn't seen things that way. Unfortunately, it's going the other way.
Yes.
And it's a terrible, terrible, terrible loss. And now with this Ukrainian business splitting the left, it's an even worse loss. But by God, it's like I said at my talk there with the spider. You know?
Yeah, I remember.
There's nothing else to do than to keep fighting and to hope that things change for the better. And sometimes they do. And since the world in general is becoming tighter, the whole situation, I mean, capitalism is going downhill. It seems clear. The United States is not what it was 20 years, 40 years ago in its economy. And now with China, things aren't changing. We have to do whatever we can to see that they change in the right direction, but they are changing. And as I say, I'm not as optimistic as in those days when I thought, hey, a few more years it'll be more. I realize now I'm not going to see any of it, but which I wasn't so sure of then. But damn it, I won't give up. If there's no atomic explosion, the people, they keep getting pushed down, but they keep rising up again. Sometimes it takes some years till they get out of, like after 1990, it took years for the left to get out at least a little bit, and it still hasn't really recovered from 1990, the left, because there's no international now. There was a Comintern. And despite all its blunders and its bad elements, it did have a central function of combining struggles from New York to India to London to South Africa. There was a connection there in battles, which was so important. Supporting Spain, it wasn't strong enough, but at least you had it. But you did have a central force trying to help to support Spain. In the end, the other side turned out to be stronger. But then, of course, that came to the World War, and you had it again. There's constant attempts to form some kind of an international left-wing combination. It hasn't really, well, there is one, but there's one of the communist parties, but they're all like this. And some of them are very left sectarian. But damn it, people are moving. People are moving. In Britain, they took a terrible defeat with Corbyn.
Mm-hmm.
It was a nasty, dirty defeat when he got pushed out. But they're fighting again. In one union after the other is putting up a big fight. And in France, a defeat again. The Communist Party was pretty well defeated completely, and the others weren't much. But now they're fighting again, by God, and Macron is scared.
He should, yes.
And in Spain, now there've been some good fights too, although the situation's pretty rotten now, I think. But there was a huge women's demonstration a few weeks ago, wasn't there?
On the 8th of March, yes.
Huh?
On the 8th of March, yes.
And that's something that's important, I think. It wasn't the kind of feminist fight against the males. It wasn't. It was for our rights. That's good.
Yes, yes.
And I heard that there's some attempt now to form a new Spanish left.
Yes, there is, but it's just very complicated.
Yes, I never quite keep up with when is it the when is it the left party, the Communist Party, the combination with the Podemos is back and forth and very complicated for me. But by the way, when I was with my son in Valencia, that was at the time for the Indignados.
Ah.
They had this camp. Did you see it?
No, I was in Germany.
But you know, of course, about it. It was in Madrid, of course, was the main one.
Yeah.
But in Valencia, they also had it. Where they stayed, overnight they had tents.
Yeah.
And they had a little first aid tent, and a book tent, and a mail tent, and then the others were for sleeping. And it was quite interesting. I got to talking with 2 people there only. One of them was somewhat dark-skinned, and it turned out he was a Sahrawi,
South.
a student.
Yes.
But he was part of it, of course.
Of course, they were part of Spain.
Yeah.
Until we just abandoned them,
Yeah.
and now
Yeah.
betrayed them.
Yes. Yes. Like everybody else, almost.
Well, but the part of the Spanish government was particularly ugly. So the decision of the president of Spain on this agreement with the King of Morocco has been particularly nasty
Yes.
recently.
Oh, really? No. But there seem to be some developments now of a better kind. Is it?
Well,
No,
this is
it's that I think that they had a big conference, the Sahrawis.
They are trying, the Frente Polisario is trying to change things, but it's going to be much harder now for them. Much harder.
Yes.
And, this is what makes me particularly upset, because people are, of course, there should not be war in Ukraine, and what Putin did was wrong. But people tend to forget that the inhabitants of Sub-Sahara were Spaniards until very recently, and when you get in the news now, the police has successfully stopped 300 Arabs trying to come to Spain. They're not Arabs;
Ah, the Sahrawis.
they're from Sub-Sahara.
Really?
Yes. And they just mention it, by the way, this happened, but we stopped them, so we're
Yes.
safe, you're safe. Now let's go
Is
back.
that when they were several were killed in the water?
No, this is when the president of Spain came with an agreement with Morocco for the police there to beat them basically to death and to stop them, on exchange of do whatever you want to do with the people in Sub-Sahara.
Yeah.
So, well, anyway, I'm going to stop the things now, because we have been talking a lot already.
Yeah.
But I still have a couple of
Yeah, and I shoot anything is
questions for you.